Well, hello, and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWireTV interview. Today, I'm joined by Blair Crawford. He's the CEO and founder of Daltrey. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here. Thanks very much for having me on.
Well, thank you for taking the time. Now, Blair, can we please start with you giving us a refresher on the products and services that Daltrey offers to the Australian and global marketplaces?
No problem. So Daltrey is a biometric cyber defense company. So what that means is we use biometric technology to make sure that we can defend organizations against the types of attacks we're seeing more and more regularly right now around the exploitation of passwords, poorly implemented MFA, and even physical swipe cards. So with us, it's all about making sure you know who your team members are when they're authenticating into your environments.
So, with various security and identity companies out there talking about, zero trust, about passwordless identity security, and more, and I've heard a lot of pictures over the past few months, especially with all the hacks we've been having in Australia. What makes the Daltrey approach different and better?
I think one of the big things which is happening right now is that, and it's corroborated all over the place. If you look at Verizon, if you look at IBM stats, they're saying that 80% of the attacks which we are seeing across 2021 and certainly tracking in 2022 have come from weak credentials. Now, one of the main things which differentiates us when it comes to authenticating users is that we believe we have a truly impersonation resistant capability. Technology at the moment, when it comes to identifying a person into an environment, really what they're doing, typically and generally speaking, is authenticating a device. They're not authenticating the person. And that opens up a lot of opportunity for exploit. So at Daltrey, if I was to summarize it, we give opportunity for organizations to identify the person, to make sure that there's no impersonation of that person, and overall increase the security and risk posture of the business or government entity, whoever our customer is at that particular time.
Sure, sure. And one of the things we saw a few years ago when malware started getting smarter was that there was a whole range of blended threats, which required security companies to offer a range of blended solutions to try and cover all the different angles. So that leads me to ask, which are the tech partners and platforms that you seamlessly operate and work with?
That's a great point. And we often speak to our customers and our partners about the creativity of the threat environment right now. If these people were our own team members, they would be great problem solvers and you'd be promoting them. You'd be like, these are the people who are really thinking about the big problems. Unfortunately, they're on the other side of the fence and they are looking to do harm to the way that we kind of live at the moment and to disrupt the way that we do things. So I think what that means is that you have to have capability that deals with that creativity, and that's integration. That's making sure that technology works together seamlessly. So our partners include Microsoft, Okta, ForgeRock. We're fully integrated into Ping, to CyberArk. And then we're also integrated into the physical world as well, so into Gallagher or Honeywell. It's really important that security is a collaborative discipline, and that means that vendors have to be connected in order to give an organization the best defense against what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet, and there never was. They always say you work better in a team rather than as an individual, and that's clearly the case for cybersecurity companies.
100%. We talk about making sure that you can automate as many controls as you can that give you the most significant and material impact on your security posture. So that's things like closing the door on weak credentials with, for example, Daltrey. But that then means that you can dedicate your team members to focusing on the really sophisticated, complex attacks, which require the most mental discipline, the most focus from your team members to think, how is a person going to try and infiltrate us? Automate as much as you can, close as many of the easy doors as you can, and dedicate your teams to being able to fix the real complex problems which exist within your security posture.
Sure. Well, I mean, on that topic, what are the ways that today cyber criminals are typically infiltrating companies. I mean, you talked about some of the ways of closing down the weak passwords and some of the ways companies are working together. But, how are you specifically defending, whether by yourself or in concert with others, against these known threats? And how are you sort of preparing to defend against the unknown threats?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on the weak credential piece, but there are many ways in which a business can be infiltrated. We see quite a lot of threat at the moment around insider threat, social engineering, team members, being exploited in certain ways because of potential financial distress, and then they are engineered in such a way to do harm to an organization which they're employed by. But the biggest one by far is definitely the passwords. And also we're seeing, touching on that creativity part again, the MFA spamming, like what happened with Uber. Initially, it was a credential which was hacked. And then once the credentials were available in the dark web, the adversary then looked to spam the MFA, eventually getting someone to approve one of the MFA requests. So I think one of the new attack vectors, which is really getting people to look up around what is truly impersonation resistant tech, is taking advantage of fatigue, security fatigue. So adversaries are taking advantage of the fact that people are fed up having to deal with security tools. And that's where we're starting to see things like MFA spamming, which is, I mean, it's clever. It's playing on the psychology, and psychology is a massive part of security.
It reminds me of the toddlers who use the magic of pester power with their parents to get what they want, and they keep pestering you with these notifications. If everything is a emergency, nothing is an emergency, and so it's just like, yep, okay, whatever, and they've just let the bad guys in.
I was thinking about this. We were talking about this with our teams. The Medibank example here in Australia is really dark. What these people have done. And it started to make us think about how far will people go to exploit data. We just seen a charity being hacked as well.
Yeah.
Now, on the topic of children, often parents will give access to their mobile phones to the kids to control their, screen time, to give some control around the games. But often we're seeing that the authenticator apps, which are being used to authenticate into the corporate environment, are on BYOD devices. So the question we had was, how long until we start to see the exploitation or the social engineering of kids to get them to do something on BYOD devices, which approves authentication into the corporate network? And we're already starting to see signs of that as being a major risk, which is why the impersonation resistant piece is significant.
So for companies who are listening and considering implementing Daltrey solutions, what is the typical onboarding process that you take companies through? And with all of us keeping in mind, obviously, that every company is different.
Yeah, it's really important to make sure that there is a transformation consideration of any of our projects, because we're allowing people to have an amazing and secure authentication capability, but the user experience is much better as well. No one-time passwords, no password resets. It works on any device. So making sure that people understand what that is. But of course, with any security technology, it's also important to do a few other things, to define the consent for a person actually being enrolled with their biometrics so that they can prove who they are, making sure that the scope is well detailed so that they know exactly how they will be able to authenticate and in which scenarios based on their consent. And then the last part, which is super important, is detailing the controls so that everything can be enforced from a security perspective. So transformation, consent, scope, and control. And then the actual onboarding itself is fairly straightforward. Typically, it only takes a couple of weeks to really bring the system up into a production environment. And then it's about making sure we can get everybody onto the system so they can start authenticating really quickly with a great experience.
So before we move on, what else should we know about Daltrey that we haven't already discussed?
Daltrey is a product of lots and lots and lots of experience in security. Every shape, every form of biometric tech being deployed all over the world. And we realized there was a significant opportunity, if we did it the way that we do, to protect users, to protect the customers of the organizations that buy our technology, and of course, to protect that organization itself and its data. We're big evangelists for responsible use of tech and responsible use of biometrics. And I know you're probably going to touch on this, but one of the things which people should know about us is that we really live and breathe that. We are the first cybersecurity vendor in Australia to get BCorp certification. And we'll be one of the very first biometric companies, if not the first, we're still waiting to check that, globally to get BCorp certification. Now, what that means is that we've built purpose and ethics and morals into every single thing that we do. And we believe that if you're going to change the way that tech is perceived and biometrics is perceived, so that it can be really seen to be doing something valuable for everybody who uses it, you have to really build that substance into your business. And the B Corp framework was a great way for us to substantiate our mission and our purpose.
So Daltrey has just released its biometric and cybersecurity predictions for 2023. So can you please walk us through the highlights? And obviously I'll link to the document in the article that accompanies this video for people that want to know more.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we're going to see significantly more drive from a legislative and regulatory perspective. There's a huge amount of goodwill in government right now. We've obviously had a bit of a shock in Australia about the reality of the vulnerabilities which we are exposed to. What I think will happen is you'll see significantly more people trying to remove, in our case, weak credentials from their authentication environments. One of our commercial leads predicted 50% of organizations will mark that as an initiative. I'm going to say more than that, given the 80% of the breaches that have occurred were a result of weak credentials in the last kind of 2 years, and probably before that as well. I think we're going to see individuals, like on a personal level, take much more interest in their personal security, not just within the workplace and understanding what it means to contribute to a secure workplace, but also what it means to consider how they should be themselves secure. So I think people will be doing much more research on, where is my data going? Which questions should I ask when I am signing up for a service? And then on the kind of flip side of that, I do think we'll see an increase in the amount of vulnerabilities. You know, cybersecurity is a team sport. We're going to have to really focus on pulling these teams together. And as we do that, we're probably going to see some more significant breaches. But I think what will be different next year as opposed to this year is that the readiness for it will be much more mature. And that will be great.
Yeah. Look, for a long time, they spoke about if you get attacked, and then they say, no, well, it's not if, it's when. And I think for a lot of companies, all of a sudden that when is like now. I mean, it used to be early this year in 2022, it was about a construction company going bust every week. And now it's about some sort of company being hacked just about every week. And yet hacks aren't new. We remember the anonymous group and, you know, all sorts of hacks that have happened throughout the past, you know, couple of decades. But it's just becoming even crazier now when you see tens of millions of records that are disappearing. So it's clearly something that's very needed. But something that's also needed, unless you have any comment on that, is this B Corp certification. A lot of people have probably heard of it. Some might not know what it is. Can you just recap what it is briefly for a moment? And then you talked about it before, but you know, what was the driving factor for you that said we must have this certification?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. I touched on one of them a moment ago, and that was about the, let's say, the reputation that tech was getting. And often if we speak about artificial intelligence, or if we speak about facial recognition, or we speak about social media, there are a lot of articles through media about the really bad cases or use cases for that. And don't get me wrong, there are tons of them. But often what's not then done is an opportunity to balance when that technology can be used responsibly for really beneficial use cases that protect users, that give us some sort of material improvement in the way that we do things, or we run our lives. So for us, B Corp is about saying, well, if we're going to, hold the banner up for responsible use of biometrics and all the great use cases, then we probably have to bake that responsible ethics and morality piece into every aspect of our business, because then it substantiates, and then you can also build trust, and people could look under the hood and say, hey, they actually do things end to end, which probably make it easier to believe they have the best intentions for the use of this technology. So B Corp in itself is about making sure you have a framework in your business which documents and holds you accountable to your impact on community, your impact on the environment, and your impact on your team members, as an example. And we've committed to a variety of streams, and it was a significantly comprehensive assessment process, which is quite right, in order to give us that stamp. Now, the second thing, and the reason that we did this, was that people don't just come to work anymore, and nor should they, just to perform a function. It's not about 9 to 5. What they want is to get a level of fulfillment, and they want purpose. They want to know that they're doing something. I certainly want to know that I'm doing something, even though it's my business, that's actually worthwhile. And the B Corp framework allows you to build that purpose-driven initiative into all of your team's day-to-day as well. Whether it's about supporting veterans returning to work, whether it's about contributing to your carbon footprint, whether it's about contributing to how we can support the education of children as they're looking to get into cybersecurity, for example. These things are all part and parcel of how we run our business. And from an employee value proposition piece, and from a team retention and from a team attraction perspective, it's fantastic. The last thing I would say on that is that we're trying to really move away from this whole idea that companies are about shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. This business is a platform for our customers to benefit from our team members to benefit from our investors to benefit from, as well as the communities that we interact with. And that is, in my opinion, what a company's opportunity and responsibility is. And B Corp helps us set the way for that.
And whilst I'm just thinking about it, last month in Australia, it was October, it was Mental Health Awareness Month and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And earlier this month in November, we had Scams Awareness Week. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in that security space. But just in a nutshell, how does Daltrey help its cybersecurity professionals look after their mental wellness, given that they can often be in a state of hypervigilance, hard to turn off, because it's, the cybersecurity world has gone more insane than ever before, with criminals running riot?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem right now. I actually did a podcast on it yesterday, and on our podcast with a gentleman called Peter Coronius, who runs a business called Cyber Minds. It's a non-for-profit. Cyber professionals are under extreme stress at the moment. The nature of the environment, the relentlessness of it, it needs to be addressed, because and via his studies, we're seeing is that a significant percentage of CISOs are actually looking to get out of the industry because of the stress, and that's not good for anybody. What they're also looking at is the challenges associated with like self-belief and professional efficacy. People don't know if they're actually doing a good job, because there are so many extremes. When nothing happens, everything feels all right. But the extreme nature of a breach, it kind of undermines everything that's been done for the last few years. Burnout is very high. So that mental well-being is important. So from us, we will be joining the Cyber Minds program, which will allow us to have our team members work with Peter and Cyber Minds to look after their mental health. There's a variety of things that happen in that program. Within the business and under our B Corp kind of framework, we also have an employee assistance program. It's fully anonymous, and we never know who's speaking to any of the psychologists or support. So we make that available to everybody, just in case they are feeling the stresses. And then, of course, we have to invest strongly in our leaders to make sure that they can understand the indicators of people being under an unreasonable amount of stress as a result of the environment that we work in, defining the front line of our customers, and that they can pick up any indicators and intervene to give them support. So it's multifaceted, it's highly complex, but it's critical.
Absolutely. Well, I'm pleasantly surprised to hear you talk about Cyberminds, because that's who I was going to ask if you knew about. I was at the launch of both and filmed it and have been amazed by the idea and what they're doing. And the fact that you only had a podcast as we were recording this yesterday to talk with Peter about that clearly shows just how well the idea is resonating and how important it is to all cybersecurity professionals around the world. But incredible stuff. Well, look, you mentioned your podcast. I know that you produce your own content called Identity Today, with the ID and identity, highlighted as ID. Very clever. So, can you please tell us a bit more about your content and where people can find it?
Yes, so Identity Today is our media brand, and the idea was that we wanted to contribute to conversations around cybersecurity, biometrics, identity, and then the kind of peripheral considerations like employee value proposition, mental health, the legal aspect of cyber, all these things. And we wanted to do it in a way which allowed us to bring on amazing guests. So the podcast itself is available on all the major platforms. It's called Identity Today. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's anyone that you use, it will be there. That content's really important to us because it allows us to integrate ourselves into the community, but also we really put an expectation on the guests and of ourselves to say, let's not contribute to the noise. Like, everybody can keep saying the same thing, like, we're under attack, it's really stressful. But how do we try and say something that has a tactical component to it, where someone can say, I just listened to Identity Today, episode X, 20 minutes, and I have a clear, actionable insight that's really useful. And that's our kind of mandate, like, get rid of the noise and try and give people something which is useful when they're under pressure.
Wow. That's about being a business, adding value. That's just yet another
100%.
way of doing it, yeah. So, Blair, how do you see Daltrey evolving over the next couple of years?
We have a significant opportunity to do or to have a material impact in the security posture. And it's, we've got an incredible team. We're COVID native. We started the business in COVID, which wasn't intentional. And it comes with its own challenges. But I think that built a huge amount of resilience into the company. The macro environment was hardly suitable to set up a cyber tech company in Australia. So being able to navigate that, get some incredible customers on across federal government, critical national infrastructure, publicly listed NASDAQ, publicly listed ASX companies. Our opportunity with our team and with our customers and with our backers over the next couple of years is to really change the authentication landscape, to make impersonation resistant authentication the must have, and to be Daltrey, or to see Daltrey kind of up in lights as the go-to for that. This isn't a quadrant yet. Gartner will eventually have an impersonation resistant quadrant, and Daltrey will be firmly placed as the leader. So, aside from just making that more specific, making that impact more specifically, we're expanding into the UK and we're expanding into the US. I've traveled a lot this year to both of those regions as we bring people on and into the company, and as we onboard more customers. So, the next 2 years is going to be exciting.
Absolutely, no question about that. And if you were to peer into the crystal ball a little further, what do you think securing the industry will look like in a decade's time? How will biometrics have evolved? Will we be looking at brainwave patterns that authenticate you into the metaverse? A combination of the many signals that make each of us unique, or something else entirely?
Brainwaves in the metaverse, sure. Why not? let's just let's just run with that is going to happen. Whether Daltrey is involved with it or not, is a different story. I think what we'll see though, like, and this is probably less exciting or less sci-fi than the idea that you've put out there, is that I just think there's going to be a significantly more ingrained consideration for security, like in everything that we do. Sorry, I've just swiped a fly that was buzzing around my
Look,
nose
just
there. Probably people
whilst
couldn't
you were
see
saying,
that,
yeah,
but
well, whilst you were saying that, the business, you said, security is something that's going to be part of everything that we do, and we know that in the early days of computing, security and passwords were not something that people really thought about. And just like in businesses, you used to have a technology/internet division, and then after a while, people realized, well, the whole business is a computer, internet technology business of some sort. And now the realization is that every business is a security business, it's a security company, because you have to be working with all the different partners. But if you're not a security company at your core, prepare to go out of business.
100%. And I think what we're seeing is that people are realizing, our businesses are realizing, boards are realizing that security is now an enabler. It's not something that you have to have a budget for, and it's kind of annoying to see it chomp into the bottom line.
It's not a
It is
grudge
a
spend anymore.
contributor. No, and it's a contributor to having a bottom line which is healthy. If you look at some of the stats which were published last week, apparently that Medibank hack is going to cost $1 billion. I mean, those sources, and it's whatever it is, it's so huge. And it came from, based on the stats which we have at the moment, a credential hack. It is illogical to have these types of doors open when there are so, not just Daltrey, there are so many technologies which can help close the door and have a material impact in the business. So I think we're going to see cybersecurity as it's going to be, a prerequisite for any board discussion. It's going to be something which is just part of doing business. And off the back of that, we're going to see it enable various things. And sure, it might be about secure enablement of your brainwaves on the metaverse.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention that you started the business during COVID. So, can you please tell us a little bit about your time before that, your journey in the world of tech, and then sort of separately, in brief, what is a day in the life like for the CEO of a major security company?
Yeah, so before that, I was in, and I touched on it at the beginning, I was in the biometric industry. Biometrics was really deployed for its function. It was like about matching a person to a person. And that was great. We had some great success in the company I was at previously. But there was just a bigger opportunity to make a security product that could deal with the current cyber security environment. So I got my learnings, kind of earned my stripes, so to speak. And I said, how could this be something which is significantly better and has the opportunity to really impact the security posture of many more organizations and people? In terms of the day-to-day, it's long hours right now. I'm not going to lie. It's there is a huge amount of I suppose purpose behind us and our team. We feel like we have, when we started this business 3 years ago, we knew there was something not quite right with the vulnerabilities which existed in the marketplace, and we knew that weak credentials obviously was one of them. So I think now there is a feeling of anticipation and there's a lot of adrenaline because we're in so many conversations with so many organizations where we can fix a problem for them and ultimately protect their customers from the types of things which we're seeing right now, around data hacks, exploitation of data. When we work with government, it becomes much more of a significant and tangible feeling because you're talking about stuff which is more serious. You're talking about state-sponsored espionage. You're talking about national security. And still the same issues exist around the knowing who's dealing with your environment and who's interacting with your people. So I think the stakes are quite high in that regard, and there is a feeling of responsibility. I know that doesn't really answer the question about what a day-to-day of it's like. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of actions, a lot of travel, a lot of purpose. But I think the thing which excites me most, and I'll keep this going for as long as I can, is the daily interactions with every team member. Not every team member on the same day, but making sure I've got time to booked in with every team member on a rotating basis. It takes me about 6 weeks to get around everybody, because that's when you really hear about the innovation which is happening in the company. That's when you really see what's happening on the kind of front line of security. That's where you get the ideas. That's where you learn about what drives your team members and why they're there. Um, so yeah, that wasn't really a linear response, but I
It's all
suppose it's
right.
the first thing that came to mind,
It's the
because every
authentic
day is different.
response. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and every day is different. You know, it's we've got a chunk of responsibility, and we're trying to do everything we can to do it right, and in a meaningful way. And we want to give people a platform in their professional capacity, to really excel at what it is they're passionate about. So when they leave Daltrey down the line, because you know nobody stays with the same company forever, that they are genuinely better at what they do because of what we've created here. So you know that's something that's always in the kind of front of my mind.
Sure. And also being the CEO and having that 6 weekly access until it grows and it's going to take longer with all those people, you would also hear about some of the pain points that customers have been having since implementing your and other company solutions. And then some of the greatest ideas come from customers to go to the R&D department to say, hey, solve this problem. You know, it's a winner.
100%. We like in the early days, you have the kind of baseline value proposition. You know what the vision is, you know what the gap is, but ultimately it's the conversations with customers that complete that. It's the nuanced understanding of how they work and how they need security to work for them and for their users, which kind of completes the puzzle, so to speak. But you just learn about how things that you didn't really consider are happening. Like I'll give you one use case from a security context, or from a Daltrey context about a project we're fixing. There is this situation occurring in large organizations where relatively high paid individuals who do not like doing admin are offshoring that part of their job.
Mm.
So they're kind of contracting it. Now, that is something which is kind of hard to believe, but it seems to be happening more and more regularly. And that's not something you would necessarily design a product for. That's something that you learn when you speak to people about how the misuse of credentials, for whatever reason, creates a material risk for their business. And then, of course, it goes straight into our product pipeline as a consideration or as an edge use case. And you can start to allow for the configuration and the reporting and the analysis to help detect if that's happening, but then also, of course, defend against it.
Yeah, I remember hearing about an engineer in America, a programmer, who was outsourcing his job to somebody in China for about one-fifth the pay. And it's only after the company noticed this VPN connection was happening from China that they realized what was going on. And instead of promoting the guy and, I don't know, making him in charge of all the hiring, I think they got rid of him because there was security risks in having somebody in another country having, you know, direct access and doing the work of this other guy. So if people are indeed outsourcing part of their work, their admin work to, you know, wherever. I mean, that's a security risk, and that is misusing the credentials that authenticates that person because they've given it to somebody else, right?
100%. And that's why, not to kind of labor on this point, but that is why impersonation resistant authentication is absolutely key. And not just impersonation resistant, you also want to make sure the proximity of the person who you're authenticating is close to the session
Yeah. Not
or
in
in front of the
China or,
session.
or somewhere else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's one of the key things that we take to our customers. And one of our customers, which is really focusing on that, was like their main hook for buying it. Make sure the person who is logging into the sensitive information is like directly in front of that information at that point in time. So yeah, it's a key one. And humans do funny things sometimes. And sometimes you've got to put security controls in place to mitigate that.
To protect people from themselves. Now we're nearly finished. There's a few more sort of short questions there, but now can you please share a memory of your first computer? I always like to ask that question. And then separately, what's a memory of your first virus or malware experience? You know, all those decades ago.
My first memory of a computer was there was I actually forget the name of the store. It was like a PC World. I think it was called Time, or maybe that was the model. Anyway, my dad took me and he bought me this computer, big chunky desktop, and it was amazing, But I got it, and within about a week, I realized that it only had one CD drive. And one of the major things that I wanted to do was, like, everyone was copying CDs and doing all sorts of things back then. So I needed two. So it was about taking this brand new computer to PCs and installing a second CD drive, disk drive. So that's one of my first memories that comes to mind there. Um, what was the second part of the
Oh, well,
question? Sorry.
what was your first virus or malware experience? I remember I went to a friend's place in
Oh,
the 80s, loaded something in their DOS computer, and suddenly it was the Stone virus. That was my first, and their computer got wiped. I mean, I had to sort of help them rebuild it. They lost some data, but yeah, that was my first experience of malware.
no, I remember my first. It was I don't remember what it was called, but when there was no security on personal computers,
Yeah.
and your mates used to just send you, like, they'd send you a picture of, like, check out this new car, and they would have baked some kind of invite, and then they would take over your your workstation.
God.
Like, it's unbelievable to think that that was even possible back then, and it wasn't exploited in a much more kind of meaningful way. But I do remember one of my mates doing that to me one time.
Well, we lived in much more innocent times. That's for
We
sure.
did.
So my second last question is to ask if you could please share some of the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today.
Yep. The best thing for me is to never pretend that I have all the answers. Like, it sounds a bit kind of cliche-ish, but especially when you have to build a business in a less than opportune macro environment, and building any business is difficult. Make sure that you've got people around you who have seen certain things before and can help you skip any mistakes that they may have made,
Mm.
which will cause you trouble. So, biggest piece of advice that I would give, but also that I received: don't pretend you know it all, especially if you're doing something for the first time. Find people that you are not in your bubble and won't just give you biased kind of responses because they want to be your mate. They can give you practical, pragmatic guidance based on the experiences that they've had before. And that is a really important. I suppose, doubling down on that second piece, don't just fill your circle with people that you know. Make sure you extend to people that you don't know, especially when you're doing something as big as starting a tech company that has, a real responsibility to its team members, its shareholders, and of course its customers. So yeah, I hope that's one of them.
So what is your final message to IT Wire viewers and readers and to your current and future customers and partners?
My final message is, I suppose I've got this t-shirt on: hackers don't hack, they log in. Um, if you're really concerned with the idea that a weak credential could be the undoing of the security of your business, then that would be the most obvious door to close. All the stats say, if you look at the most recent hacks as well, the ones right in the news in the last 8 weeks, the majority of them came from weak credentials, associated exploits like phishing, brute force attacks, MFA spamming. Fix that problem, and then allow yourself to really double down on making sure you preserve the talent that you have within your cyber teams, their well-being, so that they can focus in a healthy mindset at really trying to protect against the more sophisticated attacks that your organization may be targeted in. So close the easy doors, get rid of passwords, get rid of access cards, make sure the team's healthy and looked after. Yeah, and let's keep fighting back, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, Blair Crawford, CEO and founder of Daltrey, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for starting a new cybersecurity company that is actively going out there to help people with solvable problems and improving their security posture. And I hope we can talk again soon.
thank you very much for having me. Thanks very much for the opportunity to chat.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.